The Billboard 200 is a record chart ranking the 200 highest-ranking music albums and EPs in the United States. Published weekly by Billboard magazine, it is frequently used to convey the popularity of an artist or groups of artists. Often, a recording act will be remembered by its number ones, those of their albums that outperformed all others during at least 1 week. The chart is based mostly on sales of albums in the United States. The weekly sales period was originally Monday to Sunday when Nielsen started tracking sales in 1991, but since July 2015, tracking week begins on Friday and ends on Thursday. A new chart is published the following Tuesday with an issue post dated to the Saturday of the following week. The chart streaming schedule is also tracked from Friday to Thursday. Example: Friday, January 1st sales tracking week begins Thursday, January 7th sales tracking week ends Tuesday, January 12th. New chart published with issue date of Saturday, January 23rd. New product is released to the American market on Fridays. Digital downloads of albums are also included in Billboard 200 tabulation. Albums that are not licensed for retail sale in the United States are not eligible to chart. A long-standing policy which made titles that are sold exclusively by specific retail outlets ineligible for charting was reversed on November 7, 2007, and took effect in the issue dated November 17. Beginning with the December 13, 2014 issue, Billboard updated the methodology of their album chart to also include on-demand streaming and digital track sales by way of a new algorithm, utilizing data from all of the major on-demand audio subscription services in the United States. As of the issue dated January 9, 2016, the number one album on the Billboard 200 is 25 by Adele. History: Billboard began an album chart in 1945. Initially only 5 positions long, the album chart was not published on a weekly basis, sometimes 3 to 7 weeks passing before it was updated. A bi-weekly, 15-position best-selling popular albums chart appeared in 1955. With the explosion of rock and roll music, Billboard premiered a weekly best-selling popular albums chart on March 24, 1956. The position count varied anywhere from 10 to 30 albums. The first number one album on the new weekly list was Belafonte by Harry Belafonte. The chart was renamed to Best-Selling Pop Albums later in 1956, and then to Best-Selling Pop LPs in 1957. Beginning on May 25, 1959, Billboard split the ranking into 2 charts: Best-Selling Stereophonic LPs for stereo albums and Best-Selling Monophonic LPs for mono albums. These were renamed to Stereo Action Charts and Mono Action Charts in 1960. In January 1961, they became Action Albums, Stereophonic and Action Albums, Monophonic. 3 months later, they became Top LPs, Stereo and Top LPs, Monaural. On August 17, 1963, the stereo and mono charts were combined into a 150-position chart called Top LPs. On April 1, 1967, the chart was expanded to 175 positions, then finally to 200 positions on May 13, 1967. In February 1972, the album chart's title was changed to Top LPs and Tape. In 1984 it was retitled Top 200 Albums. In 1985 it was retitled again to Top Pop Albums. In 1991 it became the Billboard 200 Top Albums, and it was given its current title of the Billboard 200 on March 14, 1992. Catalogue Albums. In 1960, Billboard began concurrently publishing album charts which ranked sales of older or mid-priced titles. These essential inventory charts were divided by stereo and mono albums, and featured titles that had already appeared on the main stereo and mono album charts. Mono albums were moved to the essential inventory mono chart after spending 40 weeks on the mono action chart, and stereo albums were moved to the essential inventory stereo chart after 20 weeks on the stereo action chart. In January 1961, the action charts became action albums, monophonic, and action albums, stereophonic. Albums appeared on either chart for up to 9 weeks, then were moved to an essential inventory list of approximately 200 titles, with no numerical ranking. This list continued to be published until the Consolidated Top LPs chart debuted in 1963. In 1982, Billboard began publishing a midline albums chart which ranked older or mid-priced titles. The chart held 50 positions and was published on a bi-weekly basis. On May 25, 1991, Billboard premiered the Top Pop Catalogue Albums chart. The criteria for this chart were albums that were more than 18 months old and had fallen below position 100 on the Billboard 200. An album needed not have charted on the Billboard 200 at all to qualify for catalog status. Starting with the issue dated December 5, 2009, however, the catalog limitations which removed albums over 18 months old, that have dropped below position 100 and have no currently running single, from the Billboard 200 was lifted, turning the chart into an all-inclusive list of the 200 highest-selling albums in the country. A new chart that keeps the previous criteria for the Billboard 200 was also introduced in the same issue. Holiday albums. Billboard has adjusted its policies for Christmas and holiday albums several times. The albums were eligible for the main album charts until 1963, when a Christmas albums list was created. Albums appearing here were not listed on the Top LPs chart. In 1974, this rule was reverted and holiday albums again appeared in the main list. In 1983, the Christmas albums chart was resurrected, but a title's appearance here did not disqualify it from appearing on the Top Pop Albums chart. In 1994, the chart was retitled Top Holiday Albums. As of 2009, the chart holds 50 positions and is run for several weeks during the end of calendar year holiday season. Its current policy allows holiday albums to concurrently chart on the Top Holiday Albums list and the Billboard 200. Incorporation of streaming data and track sales. Beginning with the December 13, 2014 issue, Billboard updated the methodology of its album chart again, changing from a pure sales-based ranking to one measuring multi-metric consumption. With this overhaul, the Billboard 200 includes on-demand streaming and digital track sales by way of a new algorithm, utilizing data from all of the major on-demand audio subscription services including Spotify, Beats Music, Google Play and Xbox Music. Under the new methodology, 10 track sales or 1,500 song streams from an album are treated as equivalent to one purchase of the album. Billboard will continue to publish a pure album sales chart, called Top Album Sales, that maintains the traditional Billboard 200 methodology, based exclusively on Soundscan's sales data. Nielsen Soundscan. Since May 25, 1991, the Billboard 200's positions have been derived from Nielsen Soundscan sales data. As of 2008 update, contributed by approximately 14,000 music sellers. Because these numbers are supplied by a subset of sellers rather than record labels, it is common for these numbers to be substantially lower than those reported by the Recording Industry Association of America when gold, platinum and diamond album awards are announced. Year-end charts. Billboard's chart year runs from the first week of December to the final week in November. This altered calendar allows for Billboard to calculate year-end charts and release them in time for its final print issue in the last week of December. Prior to Nielsen Soundscan, year-end charts were calculated by an inverse point system based solely on an album's performance on the Billboard 200. Other factors, including the total weeks on the chart and at its peak position, were calculated into an album's year-end total. After Billboard began obtaining sales information from Nielsen Soundscan, the year-end charts are now calculated by a very straightforward cumulative total of year-long sales. This gives a more accurate picture of any given year's best-selling albums. As a title that hypothetically spent 9 weeks at number 1 in March could possibly have sold fewer copies than one spending 6 weeks at number 3 in January. Interestingly, albums at the peak of their popularity at the time of the November-December chart year cutoff many times end up ranked lower than one would expect on a year-end tally, yet are ranked on the following year's chart as well, as their cumulative points are split between the two chart years. Uses the Billboard 200 can be helpful to radio stations as an indication of the types of music listeners are interested in hearing. Retailers can also find it useful as a way to determine which recordings should be given the most prominent display in a store. Other outlets, such as airline music services, also employ the Billboard charts to determine the programming limitations. The chart emits unit sales for listed albums and total recorded sales, making it impossible to determine, for example, if the number 1 album this week sold as well as the number 1 from the same period in the prior year. It is also impossible to determine the relative success of albums on a single chart. There is no indication of whether the number 1 album sold thousands more copies than number 50, or only dozens more. All music genres are combined, but there are separate Billboard charts for individual market segments. The complete sales data broken down by location is made available, but only in the form of separate Soundscan subscriptions. Artist milestones. Most top 10 albums source: The Rolling Stones, Frank Sinatra, Barbra Streisand, The Beatles, Elvis Presley. Most number 1 albums source: The Beatles, Jay-Z, Bruce Springsteen, Elvis Presley, Barbra Streisand, Garth Brooks, The Rolling Stones, Madonna. Most consecutive number 1 albums source: The Beatles, The Rolling Stones, Elton John, Eminem, Dave Matthews Band. Most consecutive studio albums to debut at number 1 source: Dave Matthews Band, Eminem, Metallica, Madonna, U2, Beyoncé, Disturbed, Kanye West. Most cumulative weeks at number 1: The Beatles, Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, Garth Brooks, Whitney Houston, The Kingston Trio. Most albums in the top 10 simultaneously source: The Kingston Trio 1959, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass 1966, Peter, Paul and Mary, Whitney Houston 2012, Led Zeppelin 2014. Most albums in the top 200 simultaneously source: The Beatles, Whitney Houston, Led Zeppelin, The Monkees, U2, Pearl Jam. Album milestones. Most weeks at number 1: West Side Story, Soundtrack, Thriller, Michael Jackson, Rumors, Fleetwood Mac, South Pacific, Soundtrack, Calypso, Harry Belafonte, 21 Adele, Purple Rain, Prince and the Revolution, Soundtrack, Saturday Night Fever, the original movie soundtrack, Bee Gees, Soundtrack, Please Hammer, Don't Hurt, MC Hammer, The Bodyguard, original soundtrack album, Whitney Houston, Soundtrack, Blue Hawaii, Elvis Presley, Soundtrack. Most weeks on the chart. Note that totals are for the main album's chart only. Catalogue chart totals are not factored in. The Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd, Johnny's Greatest Hits, Johnny Mathis, My Fair Lady, original cast recording, Legend, Bob Marley and the Wailers, Journey's Greatest Hits, Journey, Metallica, Greatest Hits, Guns N' Roses, Highlights from The Phantom of the Opera, original cast recording. Tapestry, Carole King. Oklahoma. Soundtrack. Nevermind, Nirvana. Heavenly, Johnny Mathis. Led Zeppelin IV, Led Zeppelin. The Foundation, Zac Brown Band. MCMXCAD. Enigma. Biggest jumps to #1 Life After Death, The Notorious B.I.G. Vitalogy, Pearl Jam. In Rainbows, Radiohead. Ghetto D, Master P. More of the Monkees, MP Da Last On, Master P. Beatles, 65 The Beatles. Help, The Beatles. Rubber Soul, The Beatles. Ballad of the Green Berets, Barry Sadler. Biggest drops from #1 Light Grenades, Incubus. Mission Bell, Amos Lee. Showroom of Compassion, Cake. Christmas, Michael Bublé. Blue Slide Park, Mac Miller. Burning Lights, Chris Tomlin. The Golden Age of Grotesque, Marilyn Manson. The Circle, Bon Jovi. 1000 Forms of Fear, Sire. Drones, Muse. The Inspiration, Young Jeezy. Handwritten, Shawn Mendes.